Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Friday the 1st of March in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, left-wing disruptor George Galloway becomes a British MP once again after a by-election dominated by Gaza.
In China, slowing factory activity raises new questions over the health of the world's second biggest economy.
And taking it in their stride, Fed officials warn against over-analysing the latest sticky inflation data.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
George Galloway has won a seat in Parliament in the Rochdale by-election with a campaign calling for an end to the conflict in Gaza. The left-wing disruptor says voters wanted to send the Labour Party a message.
Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. You have paid and you will pay a high price.
Galloway is a former Labour MP who was kicked out of the party in 2003 for rebelling over the Iraq War. He won the election by a landslide. James Woolcock has more now on the results.
It is a major headache for Keir Starmer. George Galloway won double the votes of Labour and the Conservative candidates put together. The result will add to the sense of disarray in British politics as tensions over the war in Gaza spill over. Rochdale, with a substantial Muslim population, had been held by Labour since 2010. But Starmer disowned his own candidate in the race after they accused Israel of being complicit in the October 7th attacks. The scale of Galloway's win raises questions about how Labour lost a safe seat to a one-man rebuke of their party. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
The United Nations Security Council has called an urgent meeting after 112 people were reportedly killed during an aid delivery in Gaza. The Hamas-run health ministry says that Israeli troops opened fire at people trying to lift food from trucks. Israel's chief military spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, insists they did not target civilians.
The Israel Defense Forces operate according to the rules of engagement and the international law. No IDF strike was conducted towards the aid convoy.
The IDF says most of the victims were trampled or hit as the trucks sought to escape the chaos, but the facts remain in dispute. President Joe Biden warned that the deadly incident threatens to further set back efforts to negotiate a ceasefire.
Factory activity in China has slowed for the fifth month in a row as weak demand stunts growth. Official PMI data for February dropped to 49.1, down from January, but still slightly above the median forecast of 49 from economists surveyed by Bloomberg. The news comes after appliance maker Bosch's CEO Stefan Hartung told Bloomberg that his sector is feeling the effects of the slowdown in China.
In general, the economy, is not growing as fast as it was anticipated some years ago. So we're talking about a lower growth number. And that's what we feel specifically also in the home appliance business, also in the construction-related business, because you all know the construction business and the real estate business in China is in a trough.
That's Bosch CEO Stefan Hartung speaking to Bloomberg. Chinese non-manufacturing activity beat estimates, highlighting an uneven recovery in the world's second largest economy. Economists expect President Xi Jinping's government to announce a fairly ambitious 2024 growth goal when the legislature meets next week.
The Federal Reserve's preferred inflation metric has risen at its fastest pace in nearly a year. Recent data shows the core personal consumption expenditures price index rose by 0.4% from December to 2.5%, so above the Fed's 2% target. Despite the jump, the Bank of San Francisco President Mary Daly says that policymakers are ready to lower US interest rates.
We want to avoid holding on all the way to 2%, putting policy very tight, and then cause an unnecessary downturn. We are agile, and we're sitting in what I call the ready position. We are ready to make moves and adjust as the data demand us to do. And I think right now the economy and policy are in a good place to do that.
The Fed's Mary Daly speaking to Bloomberg there. The inflation news comes as US consumer spending dropped for the first time in 5 months, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis.
Shares in New York Community Bancorp have plunged by 22% in extended trading. The massive drop comes after the American lender took a $2.4 billion hit to earnings as it identified weakness with its loan review process. The story from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
The bank also said it needs more time to file its annual report to regulators as it shores up its internal controls. In a separate filing, NYCB said, quote, management identified material weaknesses in the company's internal controls related to internal loan review, resulting from ineffective oversight, risk management, and monitoring activities. The announcement reignites a drama that erupted at the end of January when the bank slashed its dividend and stockpiled cash to cover troubled loans. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
UK consumers are tightening their belts as the country navigates a technical recession. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the details.
One of the wettest Februaries on record seems to have also dampened the spirits of the country's shoppers. According to new data from the British Retail Consortium, the number of UK store visitors dropped 6.2% from last year, with London among the worst performing regions. Even the usual profit-driving holidays, such as Valentine's Day, failed to woo customers, casting doubt on hopes of an economic revival bolstered after retail sales rebounded in January. The latest figures put the UK behind its European peers and underscore the challenge facing Rishi Sunak, who hopes to turn the economy around before this year's general election. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more on the Rochdale election result for a new MP and also look at what the latest US economic data means for the Federal Reserve. But then this also caught our eye. We've been thinking about this because next week in China, you've got the National People's Congress taking place. This is one of the most sort of significant gatherings. Reading the latest piece from our opinion columnist Karishma Vaswani on this, about really the direction of China. The Chinese parliament has given this unprecedented amount of control to Xi that he's sort of exerted over the political system, over people in China. Karishma Vaswani saying, this is quite a significant event, talking about, strong men often squeezing countries, but squeezing them too far. And she's putting Xi Jinping in that camp. Yeah,
and it's kind of saying this is a moment also for Xi Jinping to perhaps demonstrate a shift in his leadership if he wants to try and inspire the confidence not only in his management of the economy, but also, more importantly, in consumers, which would help the economic situation too.
Yes, so political legitimacy resting on economic accomplishments, and trying to raise the living standards of nearly 1.4 billion people. But how do you do that? In fact, the meeting next week has been delayed for quite some time, so that's also been underlined perhaps as problematic.
It's one of the events we're watching out for in the coming days. But let's get more now on the overnight by-election results here in the UK. The left-wing candidate, former Labour MP George Galloway, was elected after a campaign that focused on calling for an end to the conflict in Gaza. Our UK correspondent Lizzie Burden is with us for more this morning. Lizzie, good morning to you. Take us through the results then and what led to George Galloway being elected.
Well, the run of Labour by-election victories is over. George Galloway won 39% of the vote for the Workers' Party. Second place as an independent candidate, third place the Conservatives, and in sixth place the Reform Party, which of course has been something of a threat to the Conservatives recently. But you'll remember the Labour candidate had to be dropped over his comments over the Israel-Hamas war. He came in fourth, and it adds to the sense of chaos over the situation in the Middle East and the sense of chaos about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism here in Britain. Rochdale is a former mill town. It's near Manchester. It's got a big Muslim population. It had been Labour's, but this sort of chaos is exactly the environment that a character like George Galloway thrives in. He was expelled as a Labour MP in 2003 over comments over the Iraq War. He's made a career out of whipping up anger in Muslim communities, and his argument was that Starmer hadn't taken a strong enough line on Israel. You heard him in the headlines there. This is for Gaza, was what he said when he won.
Yeah, and so the question, how relevant is this then at a national level? Because it perhaps seems to have been driven so much by one foreign policy issue.
Yeah, we're always trying to see whether by-election results can be used as some sort of barometer for the general election. The idea is this isn't likely to affect that, and actually Labour's going to fancy its chances taking the seat back when it comes to the general election. But it gives George Galloway a few months in Parliament to pour salt in the gaping wounds in Starmer's party over Gaza. And in this particular case, Starmer was accused of acting too late to withdraw support for Azhar Ali, the candidate for Labour there, for implementing double standards since he took over as leader from Jeremy Corbyn by being harsh on the left-wingers associated with anti-Semitism, but more lenient with the centrists in the same boat. So the difficulties on this continue for Keir Starmer.
Meanwhile, the Conservatives came in third, Lizzie, in this by-election. This, as Rishi Sunak is facing a very different problem, and this is accusations of Islamophobia. Yeah,
the former deputy party chairman of the Conservative Party said that Islamists have got control of London and that the Muslim Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan had given control of the capital to his mates. And after that, you had ministers falling over themselves on the airwaves, simply unable to say that this was Islamophobic rather than wrong. And it plays into a bigger battle for the leadership of the Conservative Party. A threat to Rishi Sunak is Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary. She says that Islam is a threat to the British way of life. And indeed, you heard Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, stateside last week, speaking to Steve Bannon, saying that her premiership was sabotaged by the deep state. And she says a radical Islamic party could win in Rochdale, by which she supposedly meant George Galloway.
Yeah. So that aside, then, we still have to think about the budget next Wednesday. The latest that we're hearing on Jeremy Hunt's plan.
I'll start with the obvious. He's thought to be planning an extension to the fuel duty cut. That was kind of a given it's perennially framed as a temporary measure so that the long-term sums add up, and yet it keeps coming back. So perhaps more interestingly, we are hearing that Jeremy Hunt's considering extending the windfall tax, the energy profits levy on oil and gas companies that was due to expire in March 2028. He's also thought to be looking to scrap the non-DOMS policy. So basically measures that raise money, so he's got space to cut personal taxes pre-election, but also steal Labour's clothes so that they can't spend the money on whatever they want because the government's already allocated. So it'd leave Labour hamstrung for cash to spend because they've also said they won't raise the three main rates of income tax, national insurance and value-added tax.
OK, Lizzie Burton, thank you very much, our UK correspondent.
Now from the UK to the US. Stocks hit record highs after the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation came in as estimated for the fourth month of January. The core PCE deflator rose by 0.4% in January, the fastest pace since early 2023. Jobless claims data showed a slight softening in the labour market from the previous month. Our senior editor Bill Ferries joins us now for more. So markets cheered these data releases. Why, though, if inflation is still there? Does it make the Fed's path ahead clearer?
Markets are happy that there's no bad surprises. That's really kind of the bar we're looking at this point. You're right. Some of these numbers came in a little bit higher than expected, but the job market was a little softer. It does, it's been a rocky few months when it comes to people's expectations about when rate cuts would happen. At one point, it was almost 100% at a March cut. That appears to be clearly off the table. But the numbers we saw make June a possibility, and that's what I think markets were rallying around. That's what they wanted to hear at this point.
We've been hearing from a few Fed officials as well, underlining again the importance of data for their decision making. So what are the next key data points we need to be watching for?
Well, you're right. I think that's been their message throughout. We'll get more data even later today if depending on how late you stay up for it. We've got University of Michigan inflation expectations, consumer sentiment. That will be something markets are looking at. We've got ISM manufacturing coming in. And there's more similar data coming next week. So the Fed's going to be looking at all of that. I think, we're already in March at this point. And the big question, and you hear this from from a lot of the Fed speakers who have been speaking out recently, there does seem to be a consensus that there's going to be a rate cut or rate cuts this year. And it's just a matter of, will that happen in June, or will we see data in the coming weeks that makes policymakers and the markets think that it gets pushed back a little bit further again.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we've also had this warning from PIMCO over the US budget deficit and the risk of bond vigilantes. What are they worried about?
It's a little bit of a back to the 1980s, I think, with PIMCO and some of their concerns. And frankly, they've been flagging their doubts about the U.S. fiscal policy for quite a long time now. Their concern is that, holders of longer-term treasuries are going to start to demand a higher premium to not switch into shorter-term notes, given how sticky inflation could be. And frankly, the U.S. government's inability to really have a process for creating a budget. We just saw the U.S. Congress now passing an additional 1-week extension to try to prevent a shutdown. But it's a 1-week extension at this point. It's highly likely we'll get another one. The whole process for putting together the U.S. budget has become very much broken and dysfunctional. And there's with elections later this year, there's no sign that that's going to be changing anytime soon.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.